What you've seen so far with our experts and the amazing stories that they have shared with you goes back to the very principles that was taught by Wallace Wattles in his famous book, The Science of Getting Rich. But when we talk about predictable wealth, we're not talking just about cash flow and wealth creation. No, wealth is much more than just finances. Predictable wealth also includes our health and our well-being. I want to introduce you to a gentleman that I call the most amazing man that I have ever met. But before we start our interview, let me warn you that the story and the graphics that you're about to see are extremely graphic. Viewer discretion is highly advised. Bob, it's great to have you on our program today.
Well, thank you for having me on the program today, Don.
You know, talking about predictable wealth, we're talking about things that create substance in our life. It goes far beyond just money. But before we get into your story, you yourself have had incredible success. You're having incredible successes. I mean, I know in one company that you had brought in personally 500 people into that organization in 1 month. That's incredible. And I know that right now that you are making breakthrough records on a company that you're now involved in. But here just recently, you had an event that happened to you. You had an accident. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, that happened May the 7th, 2013. It was in Reno, Nevada. I just flew in from Atlanta, Georgia, and had this intuitive thought. And when you have an intuitive thought, you should go with it. And at that specific time, I thought, I have no fear. Fear is false evidence appearing real anyway. And then I was looking over, and there was a gentleman to my right, and he kept looking at me about, 500 yards away before I approached the light there at the intersection. And I had an opportunity to turn around, but I didn't. I always listen to your intuitive thoughts. So I went to the stoplight, and when I approached the gentleman at the stoplight there, I just looked briefly. I looked to my left and looked to my right, and I thought, I care, but not that much. And I just went over and I reached over and I clicked on my radio. Then all of a sudden, that's when things started to appear real quick. I was, 5 shots were taken. I had 1 shot hit me in the head. It went to hit me here and lodged a bullet behind my head. I had another one hit me in the right arm. And then all of a sudden, instead of feeling sorry for yourself or what is this, a bad event? I just snapped out of it because of this gentleman, Ed Foreman. See, I'm alive, I'm alert, and I feel great. I learned this from Jen, and I'll specifically go into Jen here shortly. Now, the training in your DNA, it's really important to go through the training and listen, what is your teachability index? And when I started training with these people that have what I want and where I've been, the specific reason why it didn't affect me, it was not a bad event. It was just a situation, a challenge, and an opportunity. And the opportunity arose at that very second. I'm alive, I'm alert, and I feel great. And when I did, my DNA switched. I gunned it at the stoplight. The gentleman still holding onto my vehicle, firing at me while I was still crossing the street. I give the guy a lot of credit. He did a very great job. He held on real well, kept shooting. And then when I got across the street to the Atlantis Hotel Casino, I went in there specifically for one reason only. I wanted to bring that guy with me in there so that way there they could apprehend the gentleman. But I was alive and alert, and I was great. And when I went into the hotel casino, I had a lot of blood, on the floor there, and they said, oh my gosh, you're shot. And I thought, I'm fine. And within 10 seconds, a police officer, within 10 seconds after the shooting, this was the key. 10 seconds, they apprehended that gentleman. And they didn't know that he had anything to do with the shooting. And the gentleman, he had the gun. He threw it off in the brush. And it went on from there. But I'll digress back to where I was. And the ambulance came and they said, well, come on, we'll put you on a gurney. And I said, that's okay. I feel great. And they said, no, this is what we need to do. So they laid me on a gurney. And they took me off into the ambulance. And I remember calling my wife. I said, I just got shot in the head. And she goes, okay. And then she went back to sleep. She didn't take it serious. But the funny part was, my phone rang again just a few minutes later, and the police officer that was in the ambulance with me, he said, your wife's on the phone. And she just said, did you really get shot in the head? And I told her yes. And she goes, okay, but my wife's a nurse. So by the time I got to the hospital there in Reno, my wife was there at the intensive care. And then I had the detectives were there also, and then the police officers, they were asking me questions while they were pulling the bullet out of my skull. I didn't take any medicine, no drugs, anything. It's all in your thoughts. Thoughts are things. Your mind is powerful. And where I learned this from is specifically from people that know this information. And I applied it, I listened to them. I brought this into my DNA. And this is what really triggered me from being at an event, which most people call a bad event, to just a situation.
You know, I want to regress a little bit here, Bob, because, you know, there's not a lot of people that have the experience of being shot in the head and shot in the arm and recovering as you did. Now, let me ask you a question. When you first got shot, what was immediately your first thought? Because, I mean, most people would panic. Most people would, you know, I mean, what's interesting, funny, when we share about the story, you know, you're so calm about it. It's like getting shot with a BB gun, but you didn't get shot with the BB gun. You got shot with a real gun. What was your first thought when that happened?
Well, just I'm alive, I'm alert, and I feel great.
You felt
I was under control. You're either an effect or you're a cause over your life.
Okay.
And instead of being an effect, I was a cause over what happened, and everything was, it just worked out.
No, you felt no pain.
No pain. No pain. Pain is something that you bring on yourself.
Okay, so you get to the hospital. And by the way, I did share this. We were talking to your wife, and she was sharing that when you first called her and said, I won't be home. I got shot in the head. Now have a good night. She went back to sleep. And she, what did he just say? Going back, okay, so you're at the hospital. And by the way, the graphics that we're showing now are the actual photos of you being in the hospital. And that's your head with all the matter there on the pillowcase and the bullet in your head and arm. When that happened, you had bleeding on the brain.
Yes.
Okay. Your head swelled up.
Yes.
Extremely well. They wanted to immediately put you in ICU, but what happened? What did you say? What did you tell the doctors?
I just said, I'm going to go home. And they said, no, we want to do check you for 3 days. You're not going anywhere. You have bleeding in the brain. My head was swelling up.
You still have the bullet in your shoulder.
Still had my bullet, yes. And I said, I'm going to go home. And they said, no, you're going to stay. And I said, no, I'm fine. I'm coherent. I signed the papers, and they let me go. I went home, and I already knew that when I went home, I was going to be fine. This is the key. I went home, I laid down on my recliner, and I did my due diligence. And after doing my due diligence, I woke up 6 hours later, and all the swelling was gone. I have no scar. The scar's gone. I got shot here. There's no scar.
That's right. I examined your head. Now, let me ask you, 3 days after you were shot, in the head, in the arm, you were speaking at an event.
That is correct. 3 days later, yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, that you see, this is an amazing story because you get shot in the head, you get shot in the arm, and 3 days later, you're speaking on stage. That's absolutely incredible. Now, when you were speaking on stage, you had no swelling, you had no side effects.
Correct.
You had none of that.
Correct.
Everyone is looking and watching right now and saying, how did you do this? Because this is an incredible story. It's an incredible story that's absolutely true. Well, how did you do this, Bob? This is what we want to know. How did you do this?
Well, that's a good question. It's just from the training. I belong to a GIN. It's called Global Information Network. And I went through their training, and I had some of the best teachers in the world. We have Troy McClain, we have Blaine Aythorne, we have Chris McGarahan, and it's who do you listen to? And Kevin Trudeau, KT, and this gentleman put us through some great training. And it's just plugging into the system. That's all it is, because you can be, do, or have anything you want in life. You know, I love that one with Henry Ford. He says, if you think you can, if you think you can't, either way, you're correct. It's the thinking that makes it so. And that's all it is, Don. It's just your thinking. It's just changing the way you think. And an event, there is no such thing as a bad event.
So during all this time, this event, the bullet in your shoulder, no pain.
Correct.
So what you're telling us is that you can control pain.
Yes.
Now, when you talk about things of this nature, this is what predictable wealth is. This is what's predictable, that you can control the events and the circumstances in your life, even when they are as intense of what you experienced, being shot. What happened to the bullet that was in your shoulder? Because they didn't remove it by surgery.
No, I went in 3 days before I flew out to a major event there in Virginia.
That was 3 days later.
That was 3 days later. Yeah, well, actually, it was 4 days later. Excuse me. I did the speaking 3 days later, and then on the 4th day, I flew to Zurich, and we had.
How many hour flight is that?
That's about an 11-hour flight.
Okay, so after being shot just 4 days prior, you get on a plane and travel for 11 hours to another foreign country. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, and it's just all in the way you think.
But what happened to the bullet? I'm still trying to find out what happened to the bullet.
Well, that's what the doctor wanted to know, too. The doctor asked me specifically 3 times. He says, "Now, Bob, where'd you think the bullet went?" Because it was lodged in my shoulder here. They had the x-rays on there. And they said, "We're not going to do any operating on your shoulder because we'll destroy your bone." And so the day before, prior to flying to Zurich, they wanted to do some more x-rays. So I went in and there was no bullet. And they asked me, "Where did it go?" And I just looked at me and said, "I didn't see anything. I don't worry about the how. It's just gone." One of my favorite mentors is Jesus Christ. He walked the earth, Socrates, Jesus, and Jesus said, "Whatever I can do, you do greater things than I." So I took that literally. I take it literally.
Now, do you believe everyone can do what you did?
Yes.
Does everyone have that power?
I believe it. Sure they do.
Everyone has that innate spirit in them.
Correct. We're all spiritual beings living in a physical body. We're living in a physical body, and our spirit and our mind, if we listen, if we stop and listen, you can do whatever you want in life. Make your dreams come true. But the most important thing, you can manifest your realities. 95% of the world, and actually 99% of the world, they dream a dream, but they don't know how to manifest it. Manifestation is the greatest thing you can do.
Napoleon Hill, I read in his original book that he wrote, Think and Grow Rich, and he talked about the Mastermind group. But here's what's interesting. Most people don't really understand what a Mastermind group really is. You see, for years, I had the concept was a Mastermind group was a group of business people that none of them were making it. They were all going to get together and talk about their woes and their problems and then wait for the sap that's going to pick up the tab for everybody's breakfast or lunch. So I said, that's not for me. I gave up that many, many years ago. But in all reality, a mastermind group is much more than that. It has to do with people supporting each other. Give me your concept.
That's right. It's called developing relationships. Developing relationships is the most important thing you can do in life. Because I don't know everything. I'm still learning. And so is the most successful people who walk planet Earth. They still learn every day. As long as you have that high teachability index of willingness to learn and willingness to accept change, then things will start changing in your life. And that's what this is all about, is developing relationships with people. And when you're doing a mastermind, it's all about gathering people together with the like-minded people. We're all like-minded. You can always tell the person that's like-minded.
So when we get into a group like this, it raises our vibration?
That is correct.
Okay. Would you say that the event that you went through and being shot, much of your survival, much of your outcome that you had was based on the vibration you were operating at?
Yes. I've been to every major event since 2009. They launched it in October. And I've been to every major event. And I remember one of my mentors. I met him in Punta Cana. You want to make it in life, don't miss a major event. I've been to every one. And it's all about vibration. That's correct.
Wow.
Yes.
Bob, this has been an amazing story. I know that this message and what you're sharing with everyone around the world, globally, that's watching this right now, you're giving them hope. You're giving them the understanding that really we have so much potential inside of us, that we can really predict wealth, we can predict our future by creating it ourselves. And the fact is that when events like this, as significant and severe as it was that you experienced, it does not have to destroy you. So Bob, you're a living example of this. I want to thank you for sharing your story.
Well, thank you for having me on the show today.
Bob Shontz, the most amazing man I've ever met.